Vera, if I start with you, because you are new to this scene, at least. So you've been associated with venture for a long time, but you have an interest in communities. I mean, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me. It's my first time at Catapult, and in fact, the first time in Oslo, so it's really a pleasure to be here. A bit cold after coming from Dubai, but it's wonderful. And you know, NFT enthusiast and crypto. In fact, it's funny how it makes you an NFT enthusiast only because you've been in a space for a little bit longer than maybe most people. And in fact, I just lost $4,000 buying fake NFTs, so maybe you should not trust my opinion on that. But I think it's a very interesting space. I do agree with Anders that there's so much more, and probably there aren't really any fully experts in that, even though many people claim to be. But I think it's an interesting space. I also agree with Anders that there's not just one future, but many futures. And one of them is that space of Web3. And why I love it, and I'm coming back to the community, is because Web3 is so much about community. You know, when we speak about Web2, we talk a lot about fans, followers, people who I mean, your followers are not necessarily your fans. They don't really kind of rooting for you in the background because they're not invested in you. Whereas Web3, what I love about it, and also because I'm building a community for women that I speak about briefly, but Web3 because people are actually invested in you. They're almost like your stakeholders, right? So it's a difference between just a fan and a stakeholder. They want you to succeed. I have bought several NFTs that didn't perform well, unfortunately, because I didn't really have such a strong community behind it. But because I believe in it, I bought 5 women in VC NFTs. Okay. They didn't, I couldn't flip them, you know, it's a term where you can buy them for more expensive. They didn't really become more expensive because they haven't really built a community behind it. So, can you hear me well? It's like, I feel like it's dropping. So it's all about building community. So maybe briefly I can just speak about the community I'm building. I'm building a community for really extraordinary women who always have been giving and inspiring and mentoring and don't really have a space where they can receive. So what I'm planning to do is build this community for women where they can be inspired again, really. And like Kimberly was saying in the beginning, community is so important. In fact, when I received the future is blank, I put in future is community because I really believe, especially after COVID, but also going forward, community is just, we can't be without community. It's so important. And you need this, not just the support, but the feeling of belonging is very human to us. And I also believe that the future is very human. We can't have the metaverse without nature and without us humans. So I think it's a big part of the ecosystem.
So, Anders, I mean, I don't know, do you think the communities will be a big part of like making the future?
Obviously. One of the tricks when you try to make predictions about the future and future technology is that you look at what human drives do they involve. And we have a drive for community. Famously, humans are social creatures. The question is just how that sociality is being expressed. So social media, it was kind of obvious that it would become a big deal. It was just not obvious beforehand how to do it in a way that became a big deal. So obviously, any technology that helps you build community, helps you build connection, helps you communicate to somebody you couldn't otherwise communicate with, is going to be a really big deal. Then again, what the technology is and how we shape it, that's going to be much more open.
I mean, the headline for this panel is obviously, I mean, dystopia, protopia, and utopia. I mean, I didn't know what protopia meant until I was actually Googling it last night. But, I mean, maybe you all know, but I found out that it was like continuous improvement day by day. So you wouldn't feel the same, like striving to be utopian, but not this pressure of actually becoming it straight away. I mean, and you mentioned, Jamie, that we need to be able to embrace change. But isn't she the human being very good at embracing change? I mean, if you look at history, right? I mean, do you think that we will be able to do that change to actually create a better world quickly, or?
I hope so. I think generally we're very bad at embracing change. I think kind of change happens to us, and we tend to resist it. And you know, it's at an individual level, it's at a company level, it's at a civilization level. what we see is disruption and change coming from the edge normally. So it's a reason, for instance, that the kind of legacy car manufacturers today are really struggling with kind of electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles, and that Tesla has come from the edge and taken and owned that market. And it happens, with societies as well. We always see it's the sort of upstarts who come through, whether it's Sumer or Rome or the UK and Northern Europe in the dawn of the industrial age that come and sweep away the past. So, I think what happens is, we start as kind of innovative and open and flexible people. And then over time, and maybe it's partly the dynamic, because in this extraction-based world I was talking about, you kind of have, it leads towards centralization and kind of hierarchy. And those types of organizations are really unadaptable and inflexible. And so the dogma takes over and the questioning takes over, and you're concentrating on kind of incremental improvement. And you don't see the butterfly, right? You're concentrating on the caterpillar. You know it extremely well. And I think that's that's the issue. So the challenge really, and I know this at a personal level actually. As soon as I become kind of threatened by something, I kind of shut down. And the challenge really is to lean into it. And I've learned that over time, that actually just lean into the kind of obstacle and the difficulty. The worst thing you can do is try and sort of hide from it or protect yourself from it. And so I think as a kind of at a kind of societal level, we need to find ways to open up, find some kind of vision that we can hold in our mind to counterbalance that kind of need for safety and security.
I always thought that the older we get, the harder it is to actually admit to change and so on. But maybe, obviously, we can learn that even as an over 40. But Kimberly, because in the riot, do you see that some people are very happy about the change and want to come into communities, or
I think we actually, the more comfortable or the less pain we have, the harder it is to embrace change. I think Norway is actually a very good example, just looking at our neighboring countries, how much further they are on innovation, because we've been quite comfortable in Norway, and the less you really need something to be different, the easier it is to do. It's not so much that we don't want the change, but we're just a little bit lazy, I think. So it's sad that we need those horrible things to happen to us, like when COVID hit and suddenly we are catapulted years and years into the future, and you see these massive changes, then we're happy with it. But it's more of not accepting things like they are, not accepting that somebody's stealing your data because I have nothing to hide, or it's just too comfortable. So we need to, and I think that if we look at the little by little changes that happen, those are the hardest ones, because you can't really adjust, because you can almost not see them. The changes just happen to you. So I think a lot of awareness and trying to really decide, am I happy or just content? And if we manage to just change our mindset a little bit and use the communities in a different way, focus on the niche communities, the ones that matter to us, and then see, how do I want this to bring value to me? How can this bring value to the world? Then we can start seeing more change.
So how do we get from, what we have today to actually creating that future that we're always talking about, and it's going so slowly, right? Why can't we just have it now? If now would be the future's now. Well, what do you say? Open to, yeah.
Well, as William Gibson famously said, the future is already here, it's just not distributed evenly. There is an awful lot of fantastically futuristic stuff in some labs that work when enough grad students hold hands around it, but it's not ready for prime time. And then you get somebody else hacking together something and they're spreading it on the social media. You have an interesting mix. As an aging futurist and transhumanist, I'm kind of waiting. Where is my life extension treatment? I'm starting to get gray hairs here. And we were really optimistic in the 90s. And that didn't come to pass, except that actually things are happening. Things are happening on a very broad front. There is a lot of funding. There is actually quite a lot of biotech. But it turns out that the hard part might actually be running big medical trials cheaply, which is not a technical problem. but a social, economic, and political problem. We didn't foresee in the 90s smartphones. I was building my own very nerdy wearable computer that wasn't not at all as competent as any modern smartphone. And I didn't even foresee that the wireless part was the super important of it, and the fact that everybody having it was the important part. So the tricky thing is, there are usually bottlenecks holding back many technologies, and sometimes that's a good thing because you need time to adapt. But some technologies we want early on. We want cheap green energy as quickly as possible, please. We want to get certain safeguards, as I mentioned early. And there we might really want to figure out what's holding them back. And some of it is just our lack of adaptation. Sometimes it's lack of good design. The reason we all got smartphones was Steve Jobs was crazy about making a design that was so addictively beautiful that everybody had to have it, and it was a high status thing. And sometimes it's just because we don't know what to ask for. I think we need to ask around more widely, and I think that future historian might very well, when mentioning the important technologies in the early 21st century, is going to mention Kickstarter among the other fancy stuff. Why? Well, it allows us to aggregate a lot of specialized interest, even in very particular, very nerdy or very obscure things, to make that happen. That enables us to do new things. And then the rest of us who might be a bit more mainstream might say, oh, that's actually a cool thing. I want a copy of that too. So I think we can innovate how we do our innovation system and make them more powerful.
But how do we look at on this wider society? Because not everyone would agree that we're actually going in a positive way. I mean, some people getting poorer, inflation, this and that. I mean, how do we make the bigger changes to actually create a better society? I mean, Jamie.
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember how change happens, right? It's not a kind of slow incremental progression, right? It's kind of rapid and non-linear. In a kind of sector of the economy, it's the S-curve of technology disruption. It goes exponentially and then flattens the market essentially. And so, we see in energy technology and in transportation technologies and food, these new technologies coming along, and they're increasing, extremely quickly, and they're just coming from a low base. And if they're doubling every 2 or 3 years, it's only 7 doublings to get from 1 to 100%. So, it's going to happen, and it's coming. It's coming quickly. And you've got these, elements of this new system all around, because what's happening with these technologies is that they're vastly more inefficient, and they're essentially zero marginal cost, right? So we'll be able to produce the food, the energy, the transportation, the materials, the stuff that we need at a very low cost compared to today. And I think we're in for a very bumpy ride through the 2020s as we transition and we see all kinds of shortages and as we build out that new system. But when it comes, I mean, it's hugely promising, and we can see, as Anders said, scattered amongst us, signs of this. We just have to know where to look.
But people are also feeling cynical and depressed about it, which is interesting because so many curves are actually going well. If you actually look at the statistics, things are going surprisingly well in many domains. But people don't know that. People think that the reasonable thing is to be cynic. And anybody saying from a stage that, oh, things are actually looking promising, oh, they're probably bought by big something or other. And I think there is the real problem that we haven't got our mental tools for this era. And this is where we might really need some new ideas.
Yeah. So what does capital play into all this? Because I was thinking impact investing, obviously, but also how do we get the capital to be spent on the right things? I mean, Vera, do you have any ideas?
If I just can briefly comment on this, on the different scenarios. I mean, if you listen to Amy Webb, I think 80% of her prediction is that it's going to be towards a more negative scenario than a positive scenario. And I think what's really important is that we actually have a bit of control who is in charge of building the new things. For example, who's in charge of building the metaverse? Who are those people? Are they optimizing for all the different, let's say, minorities, right? I mean, I think this is really important because otherwise it can go into a very kind of bad side of things. But we can still control it. And I agree that the future is actually moving really fast. So I like being on this brink between futurists and talk about this, and then entrepreneurs who actually build things, And if I look at entrepreneurs, and there are some amazing entrepreneurs in this room as well, they are building rapidly and in so many different areas. So I'm really optimistic about the future. I also think about longevity already at my age. I'd love to live longer, and I'm so excited to see what's to come, because I feel people are changing. And I mean, there is still a bit of complacency in the world, of course, but I think many of us, especially those who attend conferences as this, we are thinking about a better future. We know that with our choices, we can make a better future. So I think we really care. And there is more money going into impact investing. There's a lot of money going into crypto, of course. I think most money went into crypto last year because still people care about, a return on investment. But if we're starting about, the return on humans and see more results, that this will change people's thinking. But I'm actually very excited, and I think we can build the future that is the most optimum for all of us if we get the right people together, which is another difficulty potentially, but luckily we're here, exactly. And if the word spreads. But yes, to answer your question, lots of capital going into many different areas of longevity, AI, metaverse, the whole crypto space. It's just about, I know it's all about deregulation, but I think we need a little bit of regulation in order to make sure that we have the right people building the right things.
Thank you, all of you, for joining me here on the panel today. A big round of applause for Jamie, Anders, Vera, and Kimberly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.